Allison. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am right now living in Michigan, but I grew up in Illinois and went to school and lived in Iowa for a while, so a Midwest girl through and through. I am a organizer for electoral politics, so that means I help with campaigns in primaries, in presidential elections and general elections, etc., on the Democratic side of things. And obviously, I am in a slight hiatus right now as we just finished up the November election. I took a break from the Georgia elections, and then I'll be, going back into things in a month or two.
That's great. So to ask you a little bit more about sort of what pushed you into the organizer role, is there anything in your childhood that maybe sort of was the background or the exigency to push you to do what you're doing right now?
Sure. So I grew up in Naperville, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago. And I grew up kind of on the cusp of two towns, Naperville and Aurora, in an upper middle class neighborhood. I did not even know the difference between Democrat and Republican until I was probably 18 and able to vote. So I did not grow up in a super partisan household or anything like that. But I saw firsthand a lot of disparities between the neighborhood and the town that I live in and the town right over from me. So I grew up in an affluent area, really great public schools, wonderful, public transportation, etc., low crime. And right next door to me in Aurora was a minority heavy area, a very impoverished area. We had a lot of gang violence, etc. when I was younger. And I saw that, the difference between the public school systems, the rate of incarceration, unemployment, homelessness, etc. And I actually started volunteering at the homeless shelter in Aurora in the after school program. So that is where I got to know, a little bit more in close detail how different our politics and our lives are depending on our class, our race, etc. And I kind of saw that from someone who's upper middle class, white, cisgendered, etc. I didn't face a lot of that systemic discrimination that I saw. And so going into college, I wanted to investigate a little bit more about these disparities, especially between wealthy and poor. And I actually went into international politics in college. So that was my area at University of Iowa. I focused on Southeast Asia majority. And then the 2016 elections happened. And I started becoming a lot more domestically focused as well, and making sure that, we have people in power that I feel like are reciprocating the needs of everyday people, listening, and things like that. So I got involved in 2016 with that. But my entry into political awareness came from the disparities that I saw throughout my childhood.
You answered a bunch of the questions that we sort of had right in
Sorry.
there. No, you're all good. It was a great answer. I wanted to move into a little bit more to sort of your childhood and talk about, did you have any role models or sort of people that you looked up to? Or was it really just, that experience that drove you to go do and be an organizer?
Yeah, so I think I was a really curious child. I asked a ton of questions growing up, and one of my role models as far as a historical figure was absolutely Martin Luther King Jr. I was really fascinated with him and horrified at how his life ended. And how someone would want to, kill and take away such a wonderful and empowering and loving human being. So that for me as a young child, really did not make sense to me. I couldn't wrap my head around, why someone would want to do that. And so I kind of dived a little bit more into, racial inequality and things like that and how that came to be in the 60s, et cetera. And then personally, I think I had a lot of wonderful role models, teachers, especially in my public school system, that were extraordinary and really looked out for me and other students, and something that I wanted to make sure that I embody as well with those that I met in my profession, whether it was teaching or not. Teaching is something that I've always been interested in. I was actually a preschool teacher for a little bit, and so that is something that I think brought me into that role model aspect as well.
Mhm. And sort of, what was your first sort of introduction to organizing? What was the first thing that you did relating to organizing job wise?
Job wise, I would say the midterms elections, so in 2018, whereas when I got involved in electoral politics more extensively, I was really into issue oriented politics before that. So, international policies, things with unemployment and homelessness, and also mental health were things that I was really interested on an individual level. And then in 2018 in Iowa, I started volunteering. Well, of course, I volunteered in the 2016 election. I guess I should backtrack to that. I volunteered for Bernie and caucused for him in the Iowa caucuses. And then I volunteered a couple of times for Hillary Clinton, but not super extensively because I thought that she was going to win. And I also was in school doing a bunch of other stuff. So I didn't dive in as much as I wish I had. And then 2018, I made sure that took a lot more of an active role in my electoral politics. I interned for the governor's primary, helped volunteer for the congressional races in Iowa, and saw, firsthand how working with labor groups and community organizers and things like that was really impactful and empowering to me, and something that I wanted to do once I graduated.
Absolutely. And sort of, almost transitioning a bit to some of the roles that you talked about, your most recent organizer role. Could you sort of take me through a day to day, or really just in one day? Like, what do you do sort of, sun up to sundown? What are the jobs and sort of things that you do on a daily basis?
Sure. So my most recent organizing job was working for the Michigan Democratic Party here in Michigan, helping to elect Joe Biden, Gary Peters, and Democrats up and down the ballot for the state of Michigan, working with, community organizers, volunteers, et cetera, to make sure turnout was high, engagement was high. We had a lot of volunteers and helping with get out to the polls and things like that. I will say that the past, 6 months of my life was very not how my past experience was with organizing because of the pandemic. I was completely virtual. So I did not meet a single one of my volunteers or people that I worked with. I worked from my apartment, lived on Zoom, and did a bunch of phone calls and other community events online. So that was very different. But typically, you have a lot of in-person events. So I would say my last organizing job was working for Elizabeth Warren in the primaries. I worked with her in Iowa and then moved to Oklahoma, where I helped out for Super Tuesday. And that is, I think, more indicative of the organizing experience outside of a pandemic, where you are meeting with a bunch of people in the community, going door knocking, hosting community events surrounded by topics that those constituencies care about, making sure that they know about your party or your candidates' policy positions, answering questions, and then getting them involved. Making sure that they're going to vote for your candidate, hopefully get involved themselves in volunteering or other things like that. Absolutely the same as what I did in Michigan, except for I did no in-person activities. I did not knock a door. I focused on, building community through Zoom, which was, interesting but incredibly rewarding. And, doing phone calls and get out the vote operations, social distance wise.
Absolutely. And, you sort of talked a little bit about COVID related campaigning, and then obviously non-COVID related campaigning. And, you know, you mentioned some of the obstacles you faced COVID related, but, sort of broad spectrum on any given organizing, job that you're working. What are the obstacles you face? And you can, COVID, you can go into it COVID wise, you can go to it non-COVID wise, however you really want to answer the question.
I would say the biggest obstacle is that organizing is incredibly personal and emotionally draining, or emotionally taxing, I should say. You are getting to know exactly, people's everyday struggles, what they're going through in their lives, fighting the systematic, disparities that are preventing some people from going through that. And a lot of the times you're almost a therapist to a lot of people. that are expressing their grievances, personally, politically, etc., and having to help inspire them and make connections to try to make some positive change through electoral politics. So I would say that you need to be issue oriented and driven. You need to know why you're in this work, and believe in the candidate or the process that you are fighting for, because it can be incredibly taxing, but it is incredibly rewarding as well. So I would say making sure that you don't get lost in the emotionality of it, making sure that that helps drive you, but make sure that you also make yourself a priority as well. Do things that are for yourself, check in with yourself, mental health wise, etc. And also make sure that you're in a work environment that you can trust. So every time I go into a job, I make sure that I believe in the candidate, I believe in their mission. They have some top political priorities that I also believe in. And also, I look into the team culture, see exactly who will be my direct manager, who will be my co organizers, how they are hiring. So, what they are looking at when they're trying to build their team. And that is what also makes this work so valuable. If you put those into consideration, you make some lifelong friends and colleagues as well.
Absolutely. And you sort of actually, glossed over a bit of the next question, but could you describe maybe some stressors that go along with being an organizer, excuse me, and how you deal with those stressors?
Yeah. So as an organizer, it's incredibly broad what you're doing. You're basically the bloodline of a campaign. It's basically a startup for a job, is the best I can say. Is that all of a sudden, in May, you do not have a ground game, you do not have a team, you have to build up really fast with the amount of people and volunteers, et cetera, that you have. And then it dissolves in November, right? So it goes incredibly fast. The organization builds at a very rapid pace. Your goals are always changing, and there's always a million things you could or should be doing. So you need to make sure that you're prioritizing things throughout your day. There's a ton of stuff that you could be doing. Make sure that you are prioritizing, what is hitting your goals, and also what you think is best for your turf. So in organizing, you're on the ground in a community, in a part of a state, in a part of a country, etc. And that area has its own political landscape and people. So you're aware of that as well. So those are some things that I would say that you just need to be aware of, and make sure that you are managing your time correctly, making sure you have an open flow of communication with your boss or your supervisor, so that if goals aren't being met or something like that, how to switch course, how to strategize on how to change those goals or reach them in a different capacity, and things like that. So communication is key, and trust in yourself is key as well.
Absolutely. And, could you sort of take me through on any organizing job you've ever done? What's sort of the, highest point that you remember? You're like, this is, probably the highlight of my, organizing career. And then, on the other side of that coin, what's the lowest that you've ever been in your organizing career?
Oh, sure. Okay. So the highest I would say for me personally would be working for Elizabeth Warren. She was the candidate of my dreams. She is a wonderful human, etc. And working for her and the people that I met along the way was incredibly rewarding. Fighting for the future that I really believed in, and making sure that we were reaching for that with community organizations, etc. The caucus, in particular, the Iowa caucus, is very different than almost any other electoral organizing. And caucus night was incredibly rewarding. Seeing my teams of people that I helped train, people that were coming to our corner, to caucus for Elizabeth Warren, winning in areas that I was told a few months ago was impossible for me to even get at least one delegate and things like that. So that was incredibly rewarding to see the fruits of our labor in that way. And as well in Michigan, making sure that we had a wonderful grassroots campaign that felt connected to the community, even in virtual spaces, was incredibly rewarding. I've met some of the greatest friends of my life through my volunteers and my community organizers. So I think that, and seeing people become organizers themselves. So, for me, it's you want to organize yourself out of a job. You would love, ideally, for all of this work to be done at a micro grassroots level where community organizers that live and breathe and work in these counties, et cetera, are the motivating factors and the organizers themselves. So, I want to make sure that I'm giving people as many tools and empowering them as much as possible that when I leave and I'm done with that election, they can carry on those tools themselves and continue to build their community after this election. Um, on the downside is some of the hardest things about organizing is, as I said, it's incredibly emotionally intense. And you need to make sure that you are looking out for your emotional well-being, that you have support systems in place as well, that you feel supported, especially through your work environment, through your boss, through your co-organizers, etc. Um, and I would say it's incredibly crushing when you lose. I mean, it's the obvious answer, right? But when you put your heart and soul into a candidate, into a mission, into an election, and it doesn't pan out, you've done as much as you can, building community structures, etc., and you still fall short, as we did with the Elizabeth Warren campaign and as happened with some of the Iowa projects I was involved in through college. It's incredibly disheartening, and you have to take a moment to realize that electioneering and things like that, this organizing work is a long-term gain, and it doesn't mean that because you lost this election your work was irrelevant. So you have to look at things in a more long-term perspective as well. But you can really beat yourself up about that. So I would say those.
Yeah. Um, so on your sort of career path, is there anything that you would change? Maybe if you could go back and do differently, is there anything that you would go do differently? Or, you happy with sort of the way that your, career path and your life has played out up to this point?
That's a great question. I think that it's hard to look back and think of specific things that you would change because I'm incredibly happy with how things have turned out so far. And I do believe to some extent that most things happen for a reason, and you live and you grow. So even the mistakes that I feel like I've had have allowed me to grow as a person, as an organizer, as a community activist, as a friend, etc. So I don't think I would take anything back. I would say that I got involved in politics a little bit later than I would have loved to do. As I said, that I didn't even know the difference between a Democrat and Republican probably until I was a senior in high school. I just had a set of values that I, lived by, and then all of a sudden they molded into one party more than the other. And so I went into politics in that regard. And I got really involved in domestic politics after 2016. So that was halfway through my college experience. And that is because I was dealing with some stuff on my own. I was dealing with some mental health and physical health aspects. And of course, I wish I could have gone back and not had those issues and had worked on a few campaign cycles beforehand. But, everything happens for a reason. I am, healthier and happier today. I had a really long standing eating disorder, anxiety, things like that I had to take time to process and fight through. And I was able to put more of myself into politics and things I care about when I was able to be healed. So make sure you take care of yourself, first, so that you can pour into your projects and your passions, is something that I would say as well.
And sort of, on that same politics coin, is organizing an all-encompassing job that you're, doing organizing, almost the entire time, or is it something that, I can organize and then still be involved in politics or something that else that I enjoy outside of my normal quote unquote 9 to 5?
Absolutely. Organizing is so versatile, and anyone that wants to get involved in organizing, change their community, work on an issue-oriented campaign, or in electoral politics, you are able to do that in whatever capacity you can. So I have people that work multiple jobs and have, are single parents, et cetera, and are still volunteer leaders and help with community organizing whenever they are able to do so. And they are incredibly valuable. And then I have people like myself who it's their entire job to do organizing. But I would also say that organizing is the foundation of most electoral politics and societal change, but it's not the end all be all. So of course there are different ways to get involved and make a difference outside of grassroots community organizing. It's whatever you find is best for yourself and where you can fit in your schedule. So definitely does not have to be a full-time job, and anyone is welcome.
And, what advice would you give to sort of a teen or somebody looking to enter into the organizing field? What advice would you give to them trying to, break into that organizing sphere, or really trying to boost their standing in the organizing field?
Yeah. So I would say, first and foremost, go with your values. Make sure that you work for candidates or issue-oriented campaigns that you really truly believe in and can be passionate about in one regard or the other. So make sure that you're doing that first and not just for quote unquote, a job in particular. And also, make sure that you are ready to also learn from the community and people that you are working with as much as you are there to help teach and help them grow. You really need to listen, evolve, and adapt to the area that you are helping out with. So I worked in rural Iowa, and then I worked here in the Ann Arbor area in Michigan, et cetera. Different people, require different things. And then also, just make sure that you reach out to people that you are interested in getting to know. We're incredibly friendly as far as my experience has gone. It's so easy to network in the organizing and political sphere, as long as you are, mission driven and someone that wants to help better the community. There are people around you that will help you get there, and that will gladly give you resources, tools, advice, letters of recommendation, etc. So, join Facebook groups, reach out to the organizer in your community and get involved as a volunteer leader or LinkedIn, etc. It's really easy to tap into our networks.
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of our final, more ethereal question that's sort of wrapping up our, our sort of session of episodes is, how do you think that your job is contributing to society in a meaningful or positive way?
That's a great question, Jack. And I'll start off with two prongs that organizing is incredibly important. It is the bloodline for electoral politics, etc. But it is also not the end all be all. And we need to be constantly changing, evolving, and listening to the moment in time and what the people need. So it is not a stagnant, job. I would say that organizing is incredibly important because that is really how we change people's minds, by building community, by making personal connections, learning about the stories and, the intimate needs of everyday Americans, and cutting out the middleman of, ads, etc., and just getting right to it. And making sure that they know that they are supported, that they are cared for, and that we want to come up with solutions that will help everyday Americans. That is the purpose of organizing, and also making sure that you're making lasting bonds. So, as I said before, for me, I've had personal ties with each community that I have organized with, but I'm a transient, recent college graduate that has not set my roots down somewhere. We need to make sure that we are both, listening to the fresh new voices of people like me, and also making sure that organizing is a space where middle-aged or elderly people can also become organizers and also work in the community that they have set roots in for 20 plus years, and make sure that there's a space for those people as well. And I would say that they should be at the forefront of organizing, in my opinion. So organizing is wonderful. It is emotionally intensive, but it is incredibly worth it, and we should not give up on it.
Well, thank you so much. You made my job much easier by sort of answering some of the questions that I had already had.